projector has no control for volume.
Call the meeting to order.
I don't remember this.
Stand with a moment of silent prayer and then the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everyone is present. We can continue. Begin with the affidavit of posting. This is a meeting of the Washington County Board of Supervisors. Prior to this meeting, public notice was given by posting a copy of the agenda in the office of the county clerk and emailing the agenda to the West Bend Daily News, which is the official newspaper. In addition, the agenda was emailed to CNI newspapers, Express News, the Kewaskum Statesman, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, WIBD, WMBZ Radio, and WTKM Radio. The above action is in conformity with the state of Wisconsin open meeting law. Next order of business is consent agenda. Resolution 12, 13, 14, and 15 will be moved to consent agenda. Take a motion for the consent agenda. Supervisor Kiss, Supervisor Mahalik. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We'll begin with personal appearances, short presentation on forever honoring our Washington County veterans.
So our video isn't working at the moment, so we can do that later in the agenda if that's okay.
We're going to move also the budget goals presentation to later. And I'm going to change a little bit around here. Resolution 17 and Resolution 18 are going to come forward. They're issues that should move relatively quickly. So we'll begin with 2019 Resolution 17, authorize the transfer of ownership of the old courthouse and the sheriff's jail and residence to Washington County Historical Society Incorporated, transfer from the general fund for repairs, transfer from the general fund to support fundraising campaign. Moved by Supervisor Basil, second by Supervisor Schleif.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have tonight with us the Executive Director of the Washington County Historical Society, Patricia Lutz, and the President of the Washington County Historical Society Foundation, Marcia Teusch. So let me start by thanking the two of them, as well as the President of the Historical Society, John Sparts, who is not here tonight, for all of their collaboration and cooperation over the last over a year now on this discussion. In your packet, you have a copy of this resolution, and I hope a sufficient description of what we're asking you to contemplate today. A large general fund transfer and the possibility of additional dollars in the form of a CDBG closed grant. You may remember that from months past. Essentially, to start with, where this came from is your strategic priorities for the quality of life of the citizens of Washington County. In that document, one of the items that you had as a priority was to go to all the quasi-governmental agencies that we work with. We started with EDWC, as you might remember, and created a double down on their revolving loan fund to fully fund that by, I believe, 2022. The Historical Society was next. Currently, cumulatively, we spend just under $300,000 a year on not only the museum, but also the maintenance of the old courthouse itself. And so that became kind of the foundational premise of the resolution that's in front of you today. We've had a myriad of discussions and deliberations with the leadership team over at the Historical Society and its foundation. They internally have had a great deal of contemplation and consideration, as well as the members of the ad hoc committee that were assigned for this specific strategic priority. That $300,000, just under that number, is roughly what was utilized to calculate the first $3 million. We assume essentially that if status quo was maintained, roughly $300,000 a year for the next 10 years is $3 million. That is the first portion of the resolution. The next $1 million is capital. We expect roughly $1 million over the course of that next 10 years in capital improvements and expenditure. We did the storm windows, for example, just recently. We expect the interior windows themselves to need to be taken a look at. We know there's a boiler that needs to be taken a look at. We have an engineering firm we'll be contracting with at the county to do an assessment and give us an idea of other similar items. In addition to that, the county will be also contracting with an architectural firm upon recommendation from the foundation and their consultant. That architectural firm will do an assessment to see if the building will qualify for federal and state historic tax credits. And I mentioned already the CDBG money. We will be hiring an engineering firm to do an assessment. Their primary work is intended to see what in the building, if anything, qualifies for that CDBG close grant. That money is not a guarantee. The Historical Society is aware of that. But it is something in your resolution that we're pledging. If it's qualifying for this project, our intent is to put it towards this project. So in total, there's a $4 million, essentially a $4 million general fund transfer that would occur if you approve this resolution. In addition to that, there's just under another $1 million that they would qualify for potentially with the CDBG close, so now $5 million, and then potentially additional dollars with the historic tax credits, which would come from the state or federal government. Beyond that, the only other thing that I would add before we take questions is that this agreement in and of itself is historic, and I ask you to pardon the pun. There have been other counties that have gone through processes to part ways, if you will, with historic old courthouses, and they have not been pretty processes. Just to the south of us in Waukesha County, there was basically a 10-year window, is my understanding, that they were given, and that 10-year window closed, and my understanding now is that building's been redeveloped into something completely different, apartments, if I remember right.
The museum is still on the first floor, but they're gonna go back to the county for help because they couldn't turn on their heater or air conditioning.
So the comment was, the museum is still on the first floor of that building. I think the rest has been redeveloped, but they had to go back to the county for additional money because they have some capital issues with heating and air conditioning, things like that. This agreement that you're contemplating tonight would take that option off the table. It would transfer ownership outright to the society. You'll see in the resolution that that will happen no later than December 31st of 2022. The reason it's written like that is there may actually be an incentive for the society to take it early with regard to those historic tax credits. The building does not qualify for historic tax credits if it remains a publicly owned building. So it would need to be privately owned by the society. So this is an agreement that would both benefit, I believe, benefit the county and the society in the long term. The grant that you're proposing in terms of the dollars, the $4 million, will serve in form as a challenge grant that the Historical Society can use to leverage the community and try to get them to match those funds. Their goal is to try and drive their endowment up to $7 million, meaning go out in the community and raise another $3 million. They have hired a excellent consulting firm that has been very collaborative and cooperative with the county staff to devise a strategy, a whole new strategic plan. They've worked with members of the community to start to soundboard exactly what that strategic plan is and does. And I think they're in a very, very good position because of their hard work to make this a success. Finally, I will note in the resolution that there is one piece on that county courthouse square that would not go to the society, and that was urged early on in the process by the society. It is the Veterans Plaza portion. So if you can imagine the north portion of that property, which essentially faces the Poplar Inn, if you're familiar with the neighborhood, that portion will remain in county ownership. So when the deed is transferred, that will need to be split out and will remain county. Finally, the thing to note in the resolution, when this deed finally does go through, there was a lot of discussion about ownership and the possibility of a right of first refusal or a reversionary rights, as we've done with other buildings. That is not, I repeat, that is not in this resolution. I made clear to the society that I felt this board would not be willing to transfer $4 million to the society, or anybody for that matter, if you knew that you may be on the hook later for additional spending. And so if that is not correct, if I have misunderstood you in some way, shape, or form, you need to correct that in this resolution. I ran that past the ad hoc committee before we drafted the resolution. They endorsed that concept. Administrative committee this evening endorsed that same concept, but it is an important piece, and it was brought up again, was that a week ago or 2 weeks ago, at the last meeting I was at with society members. So those, I know that's a lot. I went into a little bit more detail than normal, but this is a big decision. I wanted to make sure you had all the pieces. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them, and again, we have members of the society to answer as well.
Okay, we do have one letter that I'm going to have the clerk read into the record.
To Washington County Board of Supervisors, subject transfer of ownership of Old Courthouse. Supervisors, the West Bend newspaper on 6/6/19 reported the information concerning transfer of ownership of the Old Courthouse from the county to the Washington County Historical Society. Justification was an annual savings of $250,000 to $300,000. The county would spend up to $1 million to cover any needed repairs, plus county would donate up to $3 million to the society's foundation for fundraising. The county proposes to spend up to $4 million for annual savings of up to $250,000 to $300,000. Savings would not offset the expenditure for up to 13 years. Why not leave the situation as it is, save the expenditures, and apply for the additional state grants for additional property improvements? I do not see the proposed change as beneficial to county residents. Thank you, Douglas Rakowski.
Supervisor Bosser.
Okay, I want to start by thanking the History Center, and I know we have Patricia and Marcia there. It took a lot of bravery for you guys to embark on this journey, and I applaud you for that. You need to continue to show that same bravery as you move forward with this vision. The next points I had are actually in direct response to the letter that was just sent. Over the last 25 years, the History Center has cost us at least $7.5 million, with a couple million more in capital costs to the old courthouse. The 25-year cost to maintain the status quo is somewhere between $10.5 and $13 million. So this plan is going to save $6.5 to $9 million over 25 years. It's also going to ensure that the History Center can forever be independent and sustainable. We're not going to raise taxes, and in fact, we'll continue to lower taxes. So this is a fiscally responsible approach to government. If instead we just cut the History Center off today, severed all ties, and repurposed the old courthouse building, the building alone would cost us $7 million over the next 25 years. So we're still saving $3 million. In addition to all that, we're setting the History Center up for success. We're giving them everything they're going to need for the future. So for the History Center, this is going to forever dissolve our relationship, but we're giving you everything you need to be successful on your own. The $3 million, as we mentioned before, is a match. We want to make sure that you can go and get donations from the community so you're going to be successful in the future. In the interest of doing my due diligence, I am going to remind you that if you come back in 10 years looking for more money from the county, the answer is going to be no. If you squander this money, there won't be any more. But having been overseeing your board for the last year, I have a lot of confidence in how you will manage this investment. It is a generous investment, but I've seen how you manage the money you have now. I have a lot of confidence in what you're going to do with it. So I thank the History Center. You guys chose to support this, and I thank you for that. And I ask you continue to have bravery as you face these changes over the next couple of years. Thank you.
Supervisor Bullowa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do support this. I just have two quick clarification questions. The first one is the 2020 transfer date versus the 2022 lease date. Can you expand upon that? I think I lost something.
Sure. So there's the 2022 date is a transfer of the property. The property must be transferred by December 31st of 2022. The operational support, so annually we budget, I think it's $130,000 roughly, for operational support to the society. That would end December 31st of 2020. So basically what we're doing is we're giving the society enough time to not only fundraise and get the pledges they need, but then actually get the money in the door as well, so that they can build that endowment and make it function. Does that make sense?
Then the second question is kind of related to that, and that is the annual support that we'll have for the budget for them. Is that included in the 3 million or the 1 million, or is that on top of?
Sure. So the operational support in 2020 is not contemplated in the 4 million, so it would be on top of, which is why it's just the 1 year. The part of the problem is we're already into planning stages. They haven't even begun to fundraise. They're waiting for you to pass a resolution. So we're trying to buy enough time operationally and in terms of capital. So it's both.
Supervisor Malik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just two things. First, as the chair of the administrative committee, we met just before this meeting, and it was passed unanimously. So this has the unanimous support of all of the members of that committee. The other thing I just wanted to make sure, because I know Administrator Showman mentioned during that meeting that there are certain types of grants and funds that are available only if a public government entity does not own that building. So from my perspective, we're actually taking the shackles off for some of the grants that are available to the Historical Society if they own the building rather than if the county owns the building. So there is a real plus in that regard as well. Just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. Thank you. Thank you.
Supervisor Bertram.
Thank you. Well, the thing that I want to talk to as far as Historical Society is I was on the on the Finance Committee like 8-9 years ago when we tried to do something for the Historical Society as far as trying to get them off the county levy, not giving them the money and that type of stuff because they were just having troubles back then. And back then, there was a number of people from the city and that came in and wanted to make sure they could get the money and all that kind of stuff. They couldn't raise money to pay their own expenses back then. The county paid their electric bill, and I believe we still do. We pay the heat, the lights, and correct me if I'm wrong, pay the heat and the lights. The only thing they really pay right now is their telephone bill. I hate to say this, but I think they're kicking the can down the road. I really do. At that time, and that's like 8 years ago or so, I might be wrong off by a year or so, they couldn't fundraise enough to take care of themselves, even if we just took care of the building. I don't know how anybody is going to fundraise $3 million when you couldn't fundraise like $100-some thousand 8 years ago. I just foresee this thing going down 10 years, and then all of a sudden there wasn't enough fundraising. There's not enough money left over to continue to keep going, and all of a sudden there's going to be this uproar that the county should take it back, whether we want to or not, because everybody's going to say we got to save the historical building. I'm sorry, I don't have any axe to grind with the Historical Society or anything like that, but I just don't picture this. It seems like such a great deal. We're saving all this money and all this kind of stuff. I just don't see it, so I'm not going to vote for it. Thank you.
Supervisor Carr.
Thank you, Chairman. I have been on the board of the Historical Society for several years. As a matter of fact, it predated my being on this board by quite a long time. And I can tell you that we have a very fine board, that the board is very fiscally responsible and frugal. The county has been cutting its support for the Historical Society over a period of years, and the Historical Society has made up the difference by fundraising in the community. we currently raise in the community for operational funding approximately $135,000 a year. It's about the same amount through admissions and fundraising and capital campaigns. Well, not a real capital campaign, but the request for funds on an annual basis from individuals who support us and foundations who support us. So the fact is that the Historical Society has shown an ability to go out and raise funds. In addition, you may recall that when the building was transferred over, the operational aspects of the building were transferred over, the Historical Society raised well over $1 million to put in the handicapped accessible facilities there, the elevator and the addition of the building that houses the elevator. That was a very expensive process. That was entirely supported by members of the community. In addition, we have had a number of conversations with successful individuals in our community, in the county, not just around West Bend, but in the county, people who have access to funds. And they have been very encouraging towards our activities and encouraging about the support that the county has offered, and we've been discussing with them what our conversations have been with the county and the relative financial support the county is willing to make to us. And they've been pleasantly surprised and indicated that they're very interested in this and that they're very interested in a matching grant program and that we will get financial support in considerable amounts from these folks. So I'm very encouraged by this. One of the things that people who know that I'm involved with, and we've had other individuals on the board say the same thing, is that people come up to us and they say, you know, we've got to save that building. That's the second most iconic building in the county. I think we could all agree that Holy Hill is probably more iconic. It appears on a variety of different tourist things, but certainly the courthouse, the county courthouse, is the most iconic building in the city. The city, as you are well aware, uses our building for their logo, without our permission, by the way. But you know, it's a very, very important important building, and we get comments all the time that the building has to be sustained and saved. And so I think when people find out that the county board approves this, which I hope they do this evening, that they'll be very, very encouraged by the activities and support by the county board to try and help the Historical Society maintain the building and sustain it into the future. And I can tell you that we have absolutely no intention of using any of this money for anything but an endowment fund. We're not going to use this money for operational expenses. This is going to go into an endowment fund, which is going to then generate investment earnings, and we're going to take those investment earnings and do what we need to do to sustain the operations of the museum and the maintenance on the building. So we're not going to fritter this away. If we get into a jam, we will cut staff before we start doing anything to remove any of the funding itself from the endowment fund that we're putting together. So I'm very encouraged by this. I would certainly encourage you all to support this. I think it's, as Chris Bossert said, it's a very fiscally responsible thing to do, and I would encourage you all to please vote in favor of this. Thank you.
Supervisor Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've made some comments previously to the Historical Society. I want to commend them for their activities. In the most recent months, we continually see more and more activities being promoted at the old courthouse, and I just want to commend them for their activities. I think this is setting themselves up very well for a very successful fundraising program. Thank you, sir.
Supervisor Krebs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, you alluded to that there would be possibly 2 engineering firms and an architectural firm hired for this process. Do we have any cost estimates on those, and how will those be paid for?
We do not. I do not have cost estimates on those at this time. We have strategic priorities funding that was in the budget that will go to fund those positions, and there are sufficient funds in that line item. Basically, what they will be hired to do is simply put the necessary plans together so that the Historical Society has basically documentation that shows them kind of the path for the next several years on the capital side, as well as what, if anything, qualifies for CDBG grant funds. And then, like I said, the architect is specifically for identifying if there's eligibility for historic preservation tax credits.
How much money has been put in the budget then for, that
For
you
that-
plan on utilizing for this then?
Sure. Do you know how much is in the strategic priorities
Or-
line item?
And/or what else could that line item be used for?
We have used that as Margie's looking. Can you look for that number? Sure. So the comment was there's about 250,000 budgeted in 19. Essentially, anytime we have something with our strategic priorities that requires us to hire a firm or have some kind of expenditure in order to execute on it, we have this fund specifically for that purpose, and so we utilize this fund for that.
Okay. Next question would be in regards to the CBDG closeout program. If this project qualifies for this grant, what other projects would not then, what else could we have used that grant directed towards that program that won't if this goes through?
Sure. So what I've asked Scott Schmidt to do, he is working with the engineering firm, is take a look specifically at the Historical Society and also develop a plan B for what happens if it doesn't qualify. So the first is if the Historical Society does qualify, then we'll just proceed with that. If it does not qualify, then we need to go and assess what other projects. Some of those that you might remember that we had brought up during the CDBG closed discussion, we're taking a look at like the Public Agency Center, our nursing home, what the future of that might be, maybe some road projects. The trouble with the CDBG money, and the reason we need to hire an outside firm specifically, is because it's all federally funded money, which means it has all kinds of federal strings attached, which means it's hard to interpret exactly what is eligible and what is not. And so we'll be taking a look at both things, but those are some of the things that we had talked about.
This would be priority one on the list of projects though for that grant.
That's correct. That's what the whereas clause is doing, is you endorsing that this is priority number one.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Say no further comment. We'll vote on this electronically. This will require a 2/3 majority. Motion passes 25-1. Moving on to Resolution 18, adoption of the Washington County Bikeway and Trail Network Plan. Oh, sorry, need a motion? Motion, Supervisor McCune, Supervisor Goddard.
I think everything is in the resolution. This is just a plan. There's not any spending. So unless you have specific questions, I'm ready when you are.
Supervisor McCune.
Okay, so there's a map on page 17 of the actual report when you go into it and hit the link for the actual system. So is Deb here today?
Yes.
And I apologize, I should have probably called you ahead of time, but it didn't come to in front of me until today, actually, when I was trying to navigate the closure of 164. So along 164 right now, when we have our County E, we don't have anything in there, but we have that green line that kind of goes through our park, I think.
Excuse me, what map are you on, Mark?
So it's page 17 of the actual full report map that actually outlines the, so it's the actual Bikeway and Trail Network Plan recommended by the Bikeway and Trail Network.
Okay.
When I go into the link, it's a color map where it shows with various colors different existing and then also planned aspects to the report. And my question, it doesn't have to be, the big question is, with the DOT projects that are out there on the state highways, I saw an absence of planned bike lanes or enhancements, or I don't know what traffic calming is considered, but all these other things there. I just didn't see as much on some of the state highways where I know there's actually work being done or will be done. Along 164, again, with what they're doing, have we had contact with them while they've, you know, there's huge endeavors at the state level on some of our state highways that they're doing things. Are those part of this in the future? They're just not on here, or?
Right. So I actually do have a couple of representatives, one from Kevin Lickey from Tool Design Group. Tool Design Group, when they identified the preliminary plan, they actually looked at not only the current projects of the DOT, but all of the future projects that they had outlined,
Okay.
as well as the county projects in our sustainability plan as well. And that was all part of some of the criteria that went into whether that was a substantial road, compatible road to have our trail on.
So that might be the bigger issue then. It may not fall under that compatibility because
Compatibility.
of the traffic and the speed and whatnot.
Yes.
That was one of the things that,
Yes.
okay,
Yep.
that would make sense, yeah. All right. To be honest with you, that answers my question then.
Okay.
But I'm assuming then the way we're getting around that with our park there to the west of that, we're somehow working possibly within that?
Yeah, so we actually have in our priority corridor number 7, it's connecting Pike Lake
Yes.
to the north side of Heritage Trails, going through Heritage Trails.
Nice.
And then connecting down through a couple of different subdivisions and some farmland, hoping to get some easements, and that'll
Where it's more
connect to
appropriate, yeah.
Glacier Hills,
Yeah.
which will then connect up to some of the DNR land, the
right.
Low Lake area.
That answers my question. And I'm completely in favor of it, and I'm hoping, as I told you individually and at a little bit of a couple groups within a city and a village that I was talking to, I'm hoping we can get the word out with the developers as they're planning on annexation and some subdivisions that they can work it within it. And it really won't cost them if you're doing everything at the time, even from a dedication standpoint. And so I'm going to support this completely. Thank you.
Excellent.
Supervisor Gals.
Thank you. It was mentioned that there's no current fiscal impact. Are there any future fiscal expenditure commitments due to the adoption of the plan?
Of course, yes. There are, in the back of the plan, it does identify what the costs are going to be. For each one of the priority corridors, there is a spreadsheet that shows what the estimated cost of that corridor is going to be, as well as the overall plan.
Right. So maybe I should have rephrased it. So we are going to plan for those expenditures at that time, and what format?
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so for today, we're looking at this plan as a guide for the county, as well as for all of our local governments, for planning purposes. And then I'm going to be working on, once this gets adopted, I'm going to be working on a strategic action plan that will actually outline and narrow down the focus of what the county intends to implement. And then we'll do additional engineering studies that will need to be done, as well as surveys, working with our landowners, willing landowners for easements, and coming up with specific costs to implement. When we do have those costs, just like any other new program, that will have to go through the appropriate budgeting process through the county board approval before we would implement.
So this is a chicken and the egg, and typically, like government, if we don't include the numbers, we're criticized because we didn't say how much this is gonna cost. If we include the numbers, we're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars, and we're out of control. So, we tried to be transparent and say this is what we think it's gonna cost. You should know though, in your capital improvement plan for the last several years, we have been putting aside $250,000 a year so that you have some funds if we have to match a grant or if we decide to build a portion of a trail. So you have started that. I think we're in the third year.
I think second year.
the
We're
second
gonna be
year.
looking into the third, yes.
So there is some fund beginning. That's not a lot of money, but we are starting to try and prepare for that as well.
Thank you.
See no further comments. We'll vote on this electronically. This only needs a majority. Is this a
I
majority?
think that's right.
Okay. Resolution passes 25 to 1. Next under consideration is 2019 Resolution 16, resolution changing Washington County's form of government to create an office of county executive, Washington County. Motion by Supervisor Basil. There, second. Supervisor Bossert. I'm going to begin, let everybody know that please be respectful of everyone. I'm assuming there's going to have a lot of comments here, so try to limit your comments. I'm going to start it off. When this great country was founded over 240 years ago, the framers of our Constitution created a representative republic. Alexander Hamilton wrote, "All men of sense will agree in the necessity of an energetic executive." The Founding Fathers wanted the president to be elected by the citizens. This is what they believed would result in equal participation by all the people. The method used to choose the leader of our county's government is unique to every other governmental body in our county. Here, the people do not elect their leader. Citizens do not have equal participation in determining the leader of Washington County. Conversely, the mayor of Hartford, the village president of Slinger, town chairman of Trenton and Barton were not voted in by their fellow board peers to be the chief officer of each respective community. The citizens trusted them to lead, casting their ballots for their leader. They are accountable to the entire population of their municipality. Washington County should not be any different. Our system of government is equivalent to granting Congress the authority to appoint a president and abandoning the democratic process of an open election that allows the people the opportunity to elect their leader. The decision before us should always be about deciding what best serves the citizens of Washington County. Each one of us here is to serve the citizens we represent. Yes, we are servant leaders. Our constituents have entrusted us with a solemn obligation to advance our county's interests and to maintain, improve, and protect the unique character that makes Washington County #1 in the state of Wisconsin for the quality of life for its citizens. There are concerns about timing because Washington County has been generating extraordinary successes. This body's challenge is to make decisions for the best long-term interest of the county. Changing to a county executive is the appropriate system of government to lead Washington County forward. The county executive model will enable this body to best serve the people that have put their faith in us to lead. I urge you to join me in supporting this resolution to change our government and create the county executive position. I urge you to trust the people of Washington County and give them the opportunity to elect their leaders as the founders intended. I urge you to support this resolution to transform Washington County into a true representative government. If we truly want to govern as the founders intended, the people should have the fundamental right to choose their leader at the ballot box. Thank you. Supervisor Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you well know, I have been struggling with this subject since I first saw Supervisor McCune's comments in the West Bend News some weeks back. My first reactions were defensive. Why am I finding out this information through a newspaper article and not from the leadership? Why would the board want to give away its control over the functioning of the county government? I dispatched an inquiry as such to you and Administrator Showman that same day. Since then, this subject has snowballed until we're at the point tonight where the sitting board will decide the leadership structure of the county for the future. During those ensuing weeks, I have asked a lot of questions of many people. I have tried to listen more than speak. My biggest question has been, why now? It's as if this has been thrust upon us and we are now being forced to respond in a knee-jerk manner. Why now, when the operations of the county itself as a collective and the Board of Supervisors are all operating smoothly? Responsibilities on the board are split among the different committees, and all board members have an opportunity for inputs. No one is being left out in a representation of the constituents. Why potentially lose the leadership and expertise Administrator Showman has brought to the county? And as such, and as much as we may want to separate the two entities, as Supervisor Dice said at the public session at Fair Park, we cannot just remove Josh from the equation and still have legitimate discussion on the impact such a leadership change will bring. Administrator Showman and leadership function are completely intertwined. Yes, we have to accept the fact that there will be a need for a buyout of his contract, but we'll leave that to the attorneys. There are no guarantees that he will seek the office of county executive, or that he will win the election if he does run, although I find it hard to believe that that will happen. There is a possibility we could have an election that would result in someone who may be popular or have high name recognition, but no abilities to successfully manage hundreds of county employees and a budget of nearly $150 million. I have heard the comment made that the citizens of Washington County are intelligent and would never vote for someone who is not qualified. I maintain that 95% of the voters in this county don't even know the name of their county supervisor, or even what district they live in. We cannot just assume citizens will choose the most qualified person as the county executive. And the spring primary in 2020 will be filled with political noise, and it could be difficult to get out to the public the message about the importance of this election. But putting the emotional reactions aside, there are some facts we need to consider. Why now? Why not now? There has been appropriate discussion, although I harshly criticized the public who opposed this action when only a handful showed up at the public forum. Why debate it further? We don't need a Mueller probe that goes on and on and on with nothing new to discuss. We are ready. We are as informed as we're going to be, so let's proceed with the decision. Let's also face the fact that this is eventually going to happen. Washington County is poised to have a tremendous amount of growth in the next decades. It is right for assuming a leadership forum that can respond more directly and more quickly as opportunities to come up to manage this growth and the changes it will bring. Will the board relinquish some control over the governance of the county? Likely some. But unlike our constituents, the members of this body are very well informed, are very logical thinkers, and very independent. And I cannot imagine this board will allow any county manager to operate contrary to the wishes of the board. There are avenues for recourse against whomever is elected as county executive. Don't underestimate the power you will have. Keep in mind, this is not Milwaukee. We may be spread out from around the county, but this is a family, and we react as such. Josh is the consummate professional with extremely high moral values and undeniable business ethics. And if he does leave us, we will get the benefit of knowing he will have prepared the administration of this county in a way that would be difficult for an inept successor to mess up. My hope is that Administrator Showman will run for and be elected as the first county executive of Washington County. I know I will fully support his election bid. With all that said, I tend to support the change of the county executive form of leadership and encourage my fellow supervisors to do as well. Thank you.
Supervisor Bosser.
Okay, so I've heard a lot of people question whether it is the right time or not to make a change to county executive. One thing I have learned is that if we wait for it to be the perfect time, it will never be the perfect time. This is a time when we need to have some vision and not dwell on the status quo. I think back to 2008. The Green Bay Packers had to make a tough decision. They had a proven status quo quarterback with Brett Favre. But they also had the option to have a vision to the future and hand the offense to a new quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. Now, at that time, many insisted we had to stay with the old. We had to stay with Favre, that he was our future. Ignoring that advice, visionaries handed the reins of our offense to Aaron Rodgers. Brett Favre never returned to the Super Bowl. 18 months later, in the 2009 season, he ended his last playoff game ever. He was doing it playing as a Viking, and he threw the game-losing interception. The following year, only 1 year later, Rodgers led the Packers to a Super Bowl victory and brought the Lombardi Trophy home to Green Bay. And that happened because the people in the Green Bay Packers organization saw that the future was with Rodgers and that waiting for the right time to make a change might cost them valuable time because Aaron Rodgers needed a couple years of playing time to be ready to win a Super Bowl. For Washington County, we know that the future is not with a county administrator, but instead with a county executive. Who will be our first county executive? Ultimately, that's going to be for the voters to decide. We just have to be visionary enough to move the county forward. Now, I don't see this idea as a risky one. At the national, state, and municipal levels, we elect the head of our executive branch. I think I read something that was prepared for today by Ethan that showed that every single municipality in Washington County elects the head of their executive branch. Ethan, am I wrong on that? He's shaking his head no. So that's correct. Every single municipality. Why would it be so bad for the county? Why would it be so much more risky for the county to do what our forefathers intended? With our current structure, the checks and balances are not in place. We have an underpowered executive branch and an overpowered legislative branch. Today may not be the perfect day, but it's a good day to make this change. And we don't need to wait for the perfect day. Change that moves us forward should always be embraced, and switching to a county executive will move us forward. This is a time to set our fear of change aside and have some vision for what Washington County will become. Now, a few months ago, Supreme Court Justice Brian Hagedorn was in West Bend campaigning, and he spoke with great passion about how the voters, when they elect somebody, they are loaning and entrusting to that person a responsibility. He did not see winning an election as gaining power that someone was meant to hoard for themselves, but instead saw it as a responsibility that the voters were loaning to him and entrusting to him. Our positions are on loan from our voters in our district in 2 year segments. At the end of that 2 years, many of us are going to go back and ask our voters for another 2 years. With our positions being on loan from the voters, our responsibility is to move our county forward, and that means choosing a county executive. We were elected to be visionaries for the future and not guardians of the status quo. And in our elections, we were entrusted with the responsibility to further our county rather than to hoard power and control for ourselves. We are giving up the power the voters have given us when we choose to have a county executive. But actually, it's not our power to give up. It is the power they've entrusted us. And it's our responsibility to use that wisely, and that means when we need a county executive, we need to make that change. So I'm asking everybody to join me in voting to switch to the county executive model of government. Thank you.
Supervisor Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll emphasize as you emphasize. We were all friends before we got here, and we're still friends after we leave tonight. So I've been mostly silent on this issue, and I've really tried to be open-minded on both sides. I've spoken openly with the members of our administration, and in Racine County, where I work, and a county exec is currently actively in place. I'm also not naive that, being early in my municipal career, this may be a future goal for myself. And one day, and perhaps other younger members like Supervisor Smisek, and that's it. But we obviously know that this kind of position is something that we would be eager and willing to look at in the future. So first off, what's uneasy to me, if I'm honest, was how rushed this process seems to have been. I was first told about this idea at the end of April, and how at least preliminary we had the summer to investigate it. Yet a month later, it's here at our door. And while some information was garnered from Administrator Kreklow speaking to us, if anything, at the listening session, the residents who voiced concerns brought up more points that made me unsure of a change than the people who stated that they were in support. To point out some of their concerns, a countywide elected official would be beholden to bases in West Bend and Hartford, possibly shutting out other smaller municipalities. That can be argued for or against. I look back, I was fortunate enough to be the campaign manager for the late and great Bob Gannon. And when we ran his campaign, we weren't naive. We knew that there was large bases in West Bend and Hartford where if somebody wanted to get elected, virtually county-wide, those were the hearts to attack. The other concern that residents have brought up is, do we really want an elected administrator? Where I work in Racine County, I work for the Village of Elmwood Park. For 58 years, the village was ran by elected officials without any sort of administrator in place. I was fortunate enough to be there first, but the amount of cleanup and organization that I had to do because the municipality was not overseen by at least somebody with experience in municipal operations was honestly astounding. With a county government our size, multiple departments, hundreds of employees, do we really want to leave the day-to-day operations to anyone? I am happy to have heard just a little bit ago that the executive committee was open to balancing out that role with another individual, and so I would be open to that, assuming we head in that direction. We also saw the turnout of during our public comment session. It wasn't very good. The amount of county residents who are really informed enough to know or honestly truly care about who they elect to this position will be minuscule to the amount of people who will turn out to vote. Instead, to me, this should be about what operationally works within our county government. And the final concerns I brought up is, do we really want to add more politics to this? Currently, this legislative body is led by our county chair and provides direction to our county admin to carry out. If we add a county exec whose ideas and views may be contrary to this collective body, while there's advantages and opposite viewpoints coming together, do we really want to add to that level of animosity and another hurdle to accomplish tasks? It seems to me that this came about because leadership is missing, and it's not anybody's fault. Josh, I think, is clear in his example to me. He is a clear leader, but maybe he's limited by the job description of being just our administrator. Don, maybe he's not the most comfortable at being our cheerleader in certain situations, and maybe that's where this proposal comes from. And I'm willing to admit that this change to a county exec may help to correct this. Side note, we also already created a public affairs position to do what I believe was also part of the admin and chair's job. I discussed that when we had voted for it before. And are we not again creating a position to help artificially create what our leadership lacks? So there's a lot of things I'm in support of changing around here. We absolutely need a smaller governing body. It drives me crazy that we have this many people that take up our meetings and drag it on hours and hours like I'm doing right now. We absolutely should not be dealing with some of these minute items that we are dealing with at our level. And we absolutely need someone to step up as a pivotal leader in our county. I will proudly support whichever direction the board decides to go on a county exec, as I've never been one to stamp my feet on the ground when not getting my way. And I truly understand the pros of a county exec. But working in the government area of Racine County and knowing the phrase of kissing the county exec's ring, I know this is not attractive to me. So unfortunately, I'll be voting no, but be in support of whatever the majority decides. Thank you.
Supervisor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm somewhat concerned about the speed with which we all of a sudden decided to put this on the agenda. There was a committee that was supposedly going to be formed to study this. I and several other supervisors were asked to be on the committee, but the committee never met. And the executive committee did have a meeting, of course, at the Fair Park where Mr. Preklow gave us a very fine presentation as to his observations of the different aspects of having an administrative versus an executive type of a government, which was very informative, but it wasn't determinative in either direction. And he was very careful to not be a cheerleader for either type of government. In fact, I believe he was quite clear saying they both could function very well. It depended upon the individuals and the people who were serving on the boards and in the administration. So I would like to have the opportunity of talking to supervisors from counties that have an executive to see what their perspective is. We haven't had the chance of doing that. I'd also like to have the opportunity of talking to an attorney to find out what all the specifics are as far as this. We know about the veto and all that sort of thing, but there may be more to it than that we're not aware of. I will say that a county executive election is going to be a political process. Now, we know, of course, it's going to be a Republican because you can't get elected in this county unless you're a Republican. But as a result of that, there won't be conversations about those aspects. There are going to be conversations about what this person perceives people want. Now, for example, this body a couple of years ago initiated a program of priority-based budgeting. I'm quite sure that no county executive is going to run based upon the idea of priority-based budgeting that's going to cause people to have to pay for the parks. So the first thing that we're going to do is to say, I'm going to restore funding to the parks. And there's other kinds of things like that this body has the ability to restrict as far as spending that a county executive, because it's a political process, is not going to be inclined to do if they want to get elected. And so I'm concerned about that process. I'm also concerned about the fact that it's a very costly county to have an election in, because we don't have any mass media in this county. The newspaper does not function very well. There's only 6,000 circulation out of 135,000 people, so it's not a very good voice for individuals to make a statement. So as a result, it's very costly to have a campaign. You've got to have a lot of direct mail. You've got to have a lot of meetings. You've got to have a lot of volunteer staff. Unfortunately, that means money, and money means vested interests. And I'm concerned that whoever does run is going to get into that kind of a situation, and those vested interests are going to have a lot of influence as to what this person who's elected is going to be proposing. And that person has a lot of ability to propose things because they set the agenda. And they have veto power over what we decide as a group. So I'm concerned about these things. Now, I'm not saying 100% that I'd vote one way or the other, but I'm going to vote against doing this tonight because I don't think that we've had the opportunity of exploring some of these things fully. And so I would recommend that we postpone this election until we've had more time to study. Thank you.
Supervisor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't really prepare anything, hadn't intended on speaking on this item, but I feel there's after today's events, a few phone calls that'll clear up a few things. Normally, we have three branches of government in our federal, which is judicial, legislative, and executive. This board basically runs as though it is Congress, and we elected Nancy Pelosi to be our leader. That is the gist of it right now. So only a few people in California actually voted for Nancy Pelosi, but yet she's the head of our county, more or less. And that's what we come to this, why we got here. This is about the checks and balances. This is about having an executive that has power and a board that keeps that power in check. A lot of people don't understand this. They think I'm giving up a whole bunch of power if I support this. I'm not giving up any power. Sure, he will speak as our titular head, this county executive, but it's not like he gets to just say what goes on around here. That's still up to us. We still hold the purse strings. We still set the agendas, and we can override a veto if we can all just start getting along and respecting each other and working together and developing our interpersonal relationships. This is something I've been working on for quite a while. Don Creefall, while he's a decent man and I consider a friend, is a part-time county board member. And he serves this community and this county as the titular head. He is the head of it. He works 40, 50 hours a week, and he doesn't even do half the stuff he could do. That's not part-time, people, because that's where our county is right now. We've grown in such a way that there's just so much to do with investment in property, in development, in jobs, in housing, in taking care of the people. We've been on the cutting edge of so many different projects. And as a chairman, it could be a full-time job. Heck, you could have two people doing it and probably still not get it done. So what this does is it creates an executive who will be the face of Washington County, who will work full-time and be paid full-time and represent us properly. I do believe in the people. You talk about the newspaper and all the rest of that. Mr. Bossert raised a great point at the public open forum where a certain carpetbagger entered our community to try and steal an election for state assemblyman. He got 1% of the vote on a spring election, 37 people, barely 1%. So our people really did know what was going on. They were actually very sharp to it. So I am going to support this move. I think it's something we need to do to have good representation in this county, to move jobs, housing, all the various projects that we have going. We need somebody that can be there full-time. We need somebody who has the power and the backing of this board and the people. Thank you.
Supervisor Brandt.
Thank you. Well, I made a few comments the last meeting at the Fair Park. One of my concerns is that at that meeting there was mention that by the presenter that perhaps the board would need to have some sort of staff of its own, and the executive branch probably would have additional staff. These things throw red flags up in my mind, is that we haven't done a cost analysis of this. Everything else that comes before this board, every resolution has a cost analysis presented. Again, I think this is being rushed. I don't think total thought of the process has been due diligence to it. I also turn to the low public turnout at that meeting, and I think the public doesn't understand the process and what's involved. I did address my local Rotary Club, which I'm a member of, and we don't have a lot of members, but everybody at that club, the comments they made were that, why do we want to do this? So there's, there seems to be apprehension. There was a comment made this evening that each of the villages and cities have an elected village president or mayor that is the head of the municipality. While that might be true, I am the head of the village of Slinger, but I don't run the village of Slinger. I have an administrator, and we hire, much like the city of Hartford and the city of West Bend. We do hire professionals to run our organizations. We might be the political head of the organization, and I agree that might be lacking at the county. So with that being said, one additional comment is that one of the problems that I struggle with at the village, and I think this is true in all the towns and villages and cities here in the county, is you can't find people to run for these posts. I have run into situations where we've had to appoint a trustee because a seat was open. And same thing comes with committees. I beg for people to be on committees. People are basically pretty apathetic. I have a fear that we could, if Josh wanted to run for the as executive, it would be a fine choice. I have all the faith in him. But Josh isn't going to live forever, and he may not want to run for the job. He hasn't made his intention clear to anybody. So at this point, I am not comfortable for voting to move forward with a county exec. Thank you.
Supervisor Dice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have always been a huge proponent of change, so I surprise myself that I haven't jumped on the bandwagon with some of the members of the board and really wholeheartedly go after this county executive position. But I have talked to leaders in the city of West Bend, because I do represent one of the districts there, and people that I regard with high estimation of them being good leaders and people that I respect, and none of them have been in favor of a county exec. My comments on this issue, I want to keep them to a minimum because I've expressed them to this board on 2 separate occasions. So you all know how I feel on this issue and where I stand. But I will reconfirm that I believe we should continue with the county administrator form of government at this time. Washington County will continue to prosper, in my opinion, whether we have a county administrator or a county exec, when it gets right down to it. Because this county has always been the Wisconsin's motto of forward. We have always moved forward in our direction of what we're doing, where we are going. That is not going to change. But this is a big issue. And I just, for some reason, in my heart, it's saying not now, at least. And I understand the arguments for it, but I guess I have to go with my gut instinct and based on the comments I've received from people. So, thank you.
Supervisor Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My opinion hasn't changed since our meeting that Wednesday night with the executive committee, so no surprises there. I've heard from a lot of constituents that are not comfortable with this change, and I look at this, some folks have said, well, you can't be afraid of change, but we can't do change just for the sake of change. Sometimes change can be irresponsible. Not enough time has been taken to examine this type of change. This would be a monumental move for Washington County. And the fact that it can be done tonight on just a majority vote, I don't think gives it the due diligence that it truly needs, as this would be such a big change. Some have said, well, we need to be visionaries and look to the future, but yet I don't believe in the past, when we have things put before the county board, we examine them, we don't usually beat them to death, and we come out, for the most part, with a strong majority vote because people see the value of the decisions that we make. Hearing what's being said in this room tonight, hearing from the constituents of this county, I think there's too much unease with going to this form of government at this time. It may be something for the future. I can see this as being something that Washington County will eventually do, but I do believe that is for a future board to decide. And when that decision is made, it needs to be made with more preparation and more information going to the constituents in this county so they know it's coming at them instead of jumping out of the bushes. So that is why I am voting against this today.
I want to go back to Supervisor Carr. I may have been remiss. Were you making a motion with your statement?
No, I was not making a motion.
Okay, I just wanted to double check. Thank you. Supervisor McCune.
Thank you. At the executive meeting, I addressed the concern possibly of adding a large staff. Mr. Brandt brought up one of his concerns, and I had heard that from a couple people as well. When we've talked about it at executive and through our listening session, the discussion we've had was to not add a huge staff as part of this. And quite frankly, it was the vision that we thought, and today when we recommended that we bring this to the board today, that it go back to executive at a certain point in time, if it's approved, to work out the actual procedure for the next step of how the support system will be arranged around that. That would include working with our county attorney, changing code, corresponding decisions that need to be changed to fit that format. As part of it, though, the intent, and I asked everybody at executive, and I don't believe there was anyone that brought up the idea that we'd be adding a large staff. The idea would be that the position that Josh is in now would be eliminated. This position would take that position as far as a formal elected official by the entire county, by all the voters, and the check and balance would be in place, which with what we have now with our chairman. The support would be through the department heads, and quite frankly, we have someone, it was mentioned at our meeting, we have someone that during a period of time is going to be retiring, and that position would then be replaced by the administrative support. So in our vision at executive, and if I'm misspeaking at all with the other executive members here, please maybe raise your hand or something that if you know, so that Don can address that. Our intent was to not add staff, and quite frankly, we considered it a wash or a push as far as the total cost. Don had brought up a cost savings. I asked everybody that if, you know, in my opinion, I was feeling it was just a push. Is that a fair representation?
That's fair.
So that's where we were coming from with that part of it. As far as the fear of, you know, Mr. Brandt brought up some other good points as far as, you know, getting people out there to serve on committees. I agree. And that's one of the factors when we have the 26 of us right now. It used to be more. I'm hoping we can continue to reduce that one more time here when we look at that maybe later in the year. I believe this, though, elected position truly will have the best interest of the county. I'm not trying to push off the responsibility of the board members and the 26 members that are here today. I'm hoping that we can have someone that truly represents the entire county, and I'm not looking to have this board shirk its duties for tough decisions. We've all had to vote on those. What I'm hoping, and as an elected official to be the leader of the overall county, that person truly isn't beholden to the 4,500 people. There were some support materials on your desk that show the breakdown between villages, the cities, we only have 2, and the towns. If you look at the statistics, the towns far outweigh the percentages of voters when you're looking at the city of West Bend or Hartford. Mr. Jenkins brought up Mr. Gannon's election. Well, that was very, very specific, though, to a map that did not include the entire county. So I will say, Mr. Jenkins, in fairness, I think you skewed that a little bit. That's not, I mean, there's a correlation, but that is not our entire county. If you look at our entire county, from tip to tip and the 4 different tips of it, it includes a lot of people with a lot of voting power within townships. You know, the system we have now would not change as far as electing our chairman from within. That would stay there. The check and balance is still there. The percentage for the veto is exactly what it is today to approve any budgetary items. The items we approve today for the Historical Society, transfer of funds from the general fund, that would still stay in place. There are no changes with that statutorily. So I think there's been a lot of fear that has been brought up that I don't think exists. I do have the faith, like many people have mentioned today, in the voters. We have intelligent voters. I'm proud to be within this county where we've elected good people at every level, from the cities, the individuals I've dealt with, from the townships and the villages. The people have made really good choices, and I don't see why that would change. At this point in time, I'm going to ask for a call of the question and for the call of the vote.
We have a call and a second. by Supervisor Basil. Is there any objections?
To cut off debate.
Yeah. Okay, what, Supervisor Bullock?
Mr. Gallus has to say?
Well,
Then you gotta call for the 2/3.
we'll have to vote on that first. It'll be a 2/3 majority to call the question. Are you ready?
Just once, can you explain?
Yes, when there's a call for the question that immediately cuts off debate, requires a 2/3 vote of this body to determine whether debate ends. If the 2/3 vote passes, then debate is over and you vote on the motion, which at this point in time is the resolution. If it turns out that the call of the question 2/3 vote fails, then you go back to debate.
Okay, we'll vote electronically. We're calling the question. I would be to call the question, and A would be to continue discussion. Supervisor Hartwig, Supervisor Stefan. Okay, we continue discussion. Supervisor Gals.
Thank you for affording me the opportunity, fellow board members, to speak in front of you. I appreciate that. Upon reviewing information about the county executive model, and including many metrics that many of you may have already looked at, other counties utilizing this model, today, as well as listening to citizen input, it was clear to me of two things. One, as been stated already, there's very little awareness of this proposed change for many informed constituents and citizens. They just clearly weren't aware of it. Also, of those that I spoke to, and many I had the pleasure to speak to today, yesterday, and last week, it was a 50-50 tie. I took tally of those that were in support as those that were not in support. So, and the fundamental right to the citizens, as was stated earlier, that should manifest itself in leaving it to citizens to make this important decision. Therefore, I suggest that this board consider a countywide referendum so that the citizens can vote if they choose to have a at-large county executive versus 26 of us making that decision on behalf of 135,000 residents.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Second by Supervisor Carr.
Point of clarification, advisory or binding? Two different referendums.
If we do the, do you want to answer that, Fred?
If this board is going to take that motion up and pass it, it would be a non-binding referendum. For it to be binding, it would have to be a petition and referendum that's generated by the community and filed with the county. So what you're asking potentially with this motion would be a non-binding advisory referendum on this board.
Understood.
Another point of clarification, are you asking for this body to approve the change with the caveat that if the citizens vote in a referendum, that it would take place then?
Say that again.
So, are you motioning that we would approve the county executive based upon, we would approve it now, and the caveat would be that the people would speak in the referendum, and then even though it would be a non-binding referendum, it would, in order that non-binding referendum would approve our actions here tonight?
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Could we get a recess for just a few minutes and try to
We're
understand?
going to take a recess.
We can do that.
Back in session. I'm going to have Attorney Stern explain the motion to amend?
Sure. So as I understand it, right now, we have a motion to amend the resolution on the floor to essentially, if the board passes the resolution to create the office of county executive, that passage would be contingent upon ratification of that decision by the electorate of Washington County via a referendum, which the county board would make binding upon itself, essentially, which it is legally capable of doing. Josh here can explain more about the potential dates involved and what that would do in timing, but basically, to summarize in a nutshell, you would be creating the office of county executive contingent upon ratification by the voters. If the voters give it the thumbs up, the office is created upon passage. If the voters do not pass that referendum, then the office is not created.
So what practically happens if you pass this resolution, or this amendment, excuse me, it modifies the resolution in front of you. It will add a whereas clause mandating that a referendum is placed on a date certain ballot. Essentially, you have 5 options. If you wanted to have a special election, which I do not advise, we'd have to go back and research whether or not we could do that. The other 4 options are all in 2020, beginning in February, and then in April, August, or November. So, in effect, any of those dates all have the same outcome. If the electorate votes it down, it's dead. If the electorate votes it up, there is an election then in April of 2021 for the first county executive. Okay? So, basically what you would need to do is clarify this amendment, assuming, number one, that that's in fact what wants to be done. I believe that's what Supervisor Gallitz wanted. And then number 2, pick a date, an election date, one of those 4 that I just offered. Again, February, April, August, or November. If you're going to, my recommendation to you, if you're going to pick a date, if you're going to go forward with this amendment, would be to pick November, which is November 3rd. It's the highest election we have every 4 years. It's a presidential election. You couldn't possibly get more people voting than you'll get voting on that date. April would be the secondary recommendation. It's a general election. It's a normal spring election. It'll align with your seats being up for office. So those are some considerations when you're picking a date. So is that, first of all, am I understanding your amendment correctly that you would attach it as a requirement of approval, essentially?
Yes.
And secondly, then we need to pick a date. Supervisor Gallitz, do you have a preference on the date?
You made a compelling reason for November.
Okay. November 3rd of 2020. There's no election. You'd have to call a special election just for this issue. And we're not certain you can even do that.
Supervisor Jenkins.
My question would be, is it possible, or what are the limitations that if we do a referendum in April, why couldn't the exec be on the November of 2020 ballot?
Statutory.
Okay.
It's got to be the next April.
Okay.
So if you passed it today, it would be April of 2020. If you passed it next April, it'll be April of 2021. And you have to provide 120 days prior to that April election, which the math works out to the first week in December, essentially. So November 3rd of 2020 is the last possible date you could do. When we initially started to do the research for this, we told the chairman, you have to make a decision on this by November of this year. And so it would be November of next year as well, because the December county board meeting would be too late, for example.
But why would it need to be why would the election for county exec need to be in April if it's a partisan seat?
It is not it is a nonpartisan seat. It is a nonpartisan seat, so it's an April election by statute.
Got it, thank you.
I'll go back to Supervisor Carr. You were the second, correct?
Yes, I will second that as it stands, and I also am in favor of the November date.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else to speak on the amendment? Well, wait. Why don't you buzz in? We've got several buzzed in already. Supervisor Krebs, were next on the list? Were you to speak to the amendment? What's that?
Speak to the amendment for now, but I still would like to speak to the resolution later.
Okay, go ahead.
Speaking to the amendment, I will be not supporting this because I feel like we're putting the horse in front of the cart here. I'd rather have us have a referendum first and then the county board vote on it after we know the results of the referendum. I would still support a November referendum. If that's a year and a half down the road plus whatever it is, that's fine. So at this time, I won't be supporting the referendum.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, to that question or that comment, I asked Ethan to look into the legislative intent of the referendum process, and there is some history.
So in front of you, I gave you a document about the year and the populations of when every county chose to go to county executive and why. And so I had a significant number of discussions with those counties. We have resolutions from some of them, and we have kind of background story. The county executive position was created in 1960 for Milwaukee. By the end of the 60s, some counties wanted it, namely Dane County. They couldn't get their board to pass it, so the law change was to put a petition from the citizens to go to referendum. So the intent of the legislation and the intent of the law is that the direct policy provision in Chapter 9 of the state statutes applies for this with a petition, 15% of the gubernatorial election. So it's why there was this kind of hoops that Waukesha had to jump through in 1989, because it was not the intent of the legislature to allow the board to go to referendum. They wanted the citizens with direct balloting, which they can do on a whole host of issues at the county level, to be driving the referendum. The intent of the legislature is to have the elected body who's elected to represent the board do an up or down vote, pass it, and if that didn't work, the citizens then could do it themselves. So that's why a referendum exists in the statute, and that's the intent of it. If you have any questions on some counties or what it is, I can answer those, but I think that's what you were looking for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Supervisor Krebs?
You talk about the intent of the referendum. That would be for a binding referendum.
A citizen petition for a binding referendum.
Yes.
To go around the board and do a county executive without board action. Citizen petition with 15% of the gubernatorial voter turnout in the last gubernatorial election, governor election, forces the referendum to be binding. So it was a way when boards were huge. In Winnebago County's case, they had 47 members on their board when they went to executive. They had board members who were interested in being county executive. They didn't get a majority vote. They went around and did a citizen petition. Fond du Lac did the same thing. Board didn't vote it. They did a citizen petition. That's the intent of the referendum language.
A board can do a non-binding referendum.
Correct.
Okay. Thank
This amendment would be binding in effect.
I understand.
Okay,
yes.
okay.
Yep, but I'm asking for other options that
Understood, okay.
we could do.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
Okay, Supervisor Schleifer, you to the amendment?
Well, I'll say something.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a little silly. We're going to pass something to give the people the vote for the executive, and they're going to wait a year and a half for them to vote whether they want it or not, more or less, right? Wow.
So you certainly could do it sooner, but it just doesn't matter. So if you put it on a February, that's the next regular election that's scheduled. It's a primary. You can do that, but you still have the same amount of time until the following April, right?
Okay. Supervisor Basil, you to the amendment?
I do not support this one bit. Next year would be turn of the county supervisors. You'll have this thing in total chaos. for years to come. You might as well just, the supervisors might as well just vote no on this right now and end it right here. If you want it, you want it. If you don't, you don't. All you're doing is prolonging this longer and longer. I just think it's just typical government. Let's not get something done. Let's just keep dragging our feet.
Thank you. Supervisor McCune?
Thank you. Well, I believe that we've been elected by our constituents to vote with what we feel is right at the county level, and I believe our executive committee did that. So for those that weren't at the executive committee, I would really like to hear all the executive committee's opinion on this referendum, because we supported it. Chris made it very clear, and if I'm misstating it, please buzz in or say something different, but Chris made it very clear that she wasn't in support of this, but she was in support of sending it to the board. Is that a fair assessment? But other than that, the rest of our executive committee, we supported it entirely. Now, you, as the other 25 supervisors, elected all of the executive members. So we've given you our opinion, and we're supporting it, other than Chris. So I think we should vote this up or down, make the decision today, make the tough choice, own it, and we move on. The next step would then be to look at the size of the board after we determine what format we would be eventually using. We talked about things that, relative to the referendum, we talked about things that need to be worked out with details. We decided that would go back to executive to do that, with the input from every supervisor that's sitting here today. So I'd love to hear from the rest of the executive group of how they feel on this referendum. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Supervisor Mahalik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to reserve my right to speak to whatever comes out as regards to the full resolution. But as to the doing something with referendum, from my perspective, a referendum is for money. You pass a referendum, or you decide against a referendum based on if it's a want or a need. I've been very pro-referendum when it comes to the municipality that I represent as mayor, and I think it makes a lot of sense. However, this is the classic case of going back to what was intimated by Supervisor McCune, and that is leaders lead. This is not something that we should be spinning off into a referendum. I do like the fact of what Ethan had brought up, that the populace is more than welcome by 15% of the gubernatorial vote, that they can move forward with it. I think that if a referendum is going to happen, it should happen out of the populace if they have an interest. We were here, I saw heads nodding when Supervisor Mary was saying that 95% of the individuals can't name the county district that they're in or their county supervisor. I am not in disagreement with that number. Now, how are we going to make sure that all of these people get informed? If there is a group that forms where you get that 15% and they start that excitement and get things moving, you have a possibility to do that. But otherwise, I think that you are going to end up with a mishmash, if you will, as regards to trying to put this through a referendum. Waiting a year and a half, I think, is a stall tactic. I think it's a foolish thing to do. Supervisor, I believe Schleif mentioned that it doesn't make a lot of sense that you have a situation where you're going to vote to pass it, but then you're going to wait a year and a half to see if you're going to implement it. I mean, that's just stupidity in the, as regards to absurd. So please, please, don't embarrass this body. Vote against this referendum amendment. And like, again, Supervisor McCune mentioned, let's vote up and down and move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Bossert.
Okay, so I hear the idea of a referendum, and it sounds to me like we're talking about, should we have an election to decide whether to have elections? That's what I hear. I would feel for staff if we would decide this, because they're left in limbo for a year and a half, especially if you're not elected. If you're, department head of whatever department, you're left hanging in limbo for a year and a half now in suspense, in addition to the 3 months they've already been in limbo. So I would feel heavily for them. On top of that, if we did this, the election would be April of 2021, which would be in the middle of county board terms for all of us, or whoever happens to be on the board at that time. So a new county exec would come in, and then a year into their term, some board members would leave, you'd get some new ones, and I believe it's state statute that it's a 4-year term for county exec, right? So we would have that happen every 4 years, where you could have a county exec switch in the middle of a 2-year county board term. So in my mind, that seems rife with trouble too. And this happened once in Waukesha where they did exactly this approach and the referendum passed. I think if you talk to most voters and they understand the difference between a county administrator who's appointed by the board and then effectively reports just to the county board chair versus a county executive who they elect, just like they elect their mayor or their village president, and like they elect their governor and their president, most people are going to support that, and I think the referendum would just pass overwhelmingly anyway. But we'd be creating a ton of uncertainty in the meantime. If you were a business, would you want to move into this county with that type of uncertainty in county government? So I think we're better off making the decision today.
Thank you. Supervisor Bullock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am 100% in favor of a vote tonight on whether we should have an executive. I feel that in our meeting before this meeting, it was brought up that we may not have ironed out everything. For example, the level of pay, the code codification, and there's talk of having a special committee put together after this evening to iron out some of those topics. So I'm in favor of a vote tonight, up or down on the main decision, and then to iron out the details in the future with the special committee.
Thank you. Supervisor Burton.
Not on the amendment.
Supervisor Bertram on the amendment.
Yeah, I think we should stop this whole thing. Geez Louise, we've got like 30-some minutes into this thing to find out if we should have a referendum, and if we vote it down, we don't vote for the executive. This whole time has been spent on it's just not worth it. Let's get on with this program and be done with it. I mean, vote on what we want to vote on in the referendum, forget about it.
Supervisor Kelly.
Whether we vote in this thing up or down, I think it's kind of a lesson in academics. We're going to be fine either way with a county executive or with an administrator. That being said, I love Mr. Mahalick's points. Leaders lead. It's a great point. Referendums should be about money and stuff like that. They should come from the people. I'm in complete agreement with that. But in this particular case, we need to strap it up and make our stand known tonight. This is our job. I don't want to defer my job to the people that elected me to come and do this job. They asked me to make these tough decisions, and I'm going to do it. Thank you.
Supervisor Carr.
There's a lot of conversation this evening about democracy and how important it is for 135,000 people to have the opportunity of voting for somebody. This is a profound change, and I don't know if everyone's aware of it, but 14 people in this room are going to make a decision tonight, one way or the other, about what goes on with the county executive position into perpetuity in this government. Because once it's changed to county executive, it's highly unlikely that it will be changed back. So 14 supervisors, because this is not it's a majority decision. It's not 2/3, it's majority. And 14 supervisors are going to decide. It seems to me that if everyone's so concerned about the ability of the individual voters in this county to make a good decision, we ought to give them the opportunity of making a decision about what kind of county government they're going to have in the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Supervisor Schleif.
I
I call the vote. Let's decide.
We have to vote on the amendment, correct?
The amendment.
So we will vote on the amendment alone. The amendment would be that we would approve the county executive position pending results. Oh, let Brad do it, sorry. He's got the paperwork in front of him.
Okay, okay. So we'll come up with the language here shortly, but essentially a yes vote on the amendment will mean the resolution is amended to require a referendum that will be binding upon this body. A no vote means there will be, the amendment fails and the resolution as is before you now is what you'll be going back to debate.
Everybody clear on that? Are we ready for a vote? Okay. Supervisor Mary, Supervisor Stefan? Okay, we're back to the resolution at hand. Is there any further discussion regarding Resolution 16? Supervisor Krebs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll keep it brief, but I would like to agree with how this debate started with some of the other supervisors, such as Supervisor Jenkins and Carr. I agree with many of the points that they brought up. Since this has come up, I have not been contacted by a single person in favor of this change, other than other county board supervisors. I've talked with 2 different town boards, and both of them also have not been in favor of this. I challenge this board, if they want to be creative, if they want to be bold and change and make no changes, not to change the executive, but to find different ways to get the best of both worlds. There are positives with both. It might not happen today. It would have to require changes in state law, but find a way where you can maintain the administrative position, but still find ways that the public can have an elected official that they can answer to. So at this time, I would ask the board to vote this resolution down, but I would also respect the decision of this board, no matter what however they choose. Thank you.
Supervisor Merton?
Thank you. I've been quiet all along and out to other meetings because I felt I really wanted to listen, see if I heard anything new that was being said by people, said by the public, or whatever. I've listened to at least 3 presentations on different forms of government for county boards. Some presented by county boards that have executive form of government, others that have an administrative form of government, and those that have a county administrator. With all of those that I've listened to and what I've heard here, I have heard nothing new that would tell me that it's a good thing for Washington County and the people of Washington County, and telling me that I really should support this. I cannot support it in good conscience because I do not think it's for the best interest of the people of this county. WCA has qualified people. We have not called any of those in. Not saying that you should go and do that too, but it would help to hear from people that have been in the trenches and know what they're talking about. Not just a few who might have a personal idea of what they think is the best, but listening to what is the best for Washington County. Thank you.
Supervisor Bossert?
So Ethan put a few sheets by us, and I can see some of the numbers and how they line up and show that it makes sense to make this change at this time. But I would like to have Ethan come up and just walk us through some of these numbers if he's willing.
I'll answer any specific questions you might have. What one did you have a question on?
I didn't have a question. I can see how these show the value of making these
Sure.
switches.
So I don't have them in maybe the same order. There's a chart about the different types of government that was created by kind of two sources, the UW Extension Local Government Center and also WCA. It explains kind of how each form of government is different. Much of it, as you read it, the difference effectively of an administrator and an executive is veto and how elected. That's the statutory difference between the two. I have the county executive history for you, what year and the population and how each county chose or didn't choose, in the case of Milwaukee, to go to county executive. One of the documents that WCA has is they point out that in an administrative coordinator, you must appoint somebody to do that since 1985, and 14 counties, I think it is, have appointed their county clerk in their county code to be their administrative coordinator, an at-large elected official, so to speak. And then that third chart there is the differences within state statute and kind of a comparable from county government to municipal government. So the county executive would be equal statutorily in powers as they map up to a mayor, village president, and town chairman. The county administrator really only has about 20 counterparts in municipal government. They're called city or village managers under a separate statute. That there's a city manager plan that a city could recreate how they do, and 20 villages and cities have done that. And then the county coordinator has very limited powers, as you see in the chart. They don't do appointments, they don't do certain things like that. So they're really equivalent to a city, village, or town administrator by statute. And then the last, there was a supervisor who asked, is it true that the votes, how are the votes distributed? You can see Supervisor McCune did a fine job explaining what that is. That is simply the fall 2018 election results and the spring 2019 Supreme Court, and the distribution of the vote totals with what percentage they were across the county.
So if I was somebody who lived in a town and I was worried that the city was going to decide elections, does this handout here support that worry, or does it seem to refute it?
In spring of 2019, 34% of the votes came from a town.
Okay, and according to this, it looks like 20% came from the city of West Bend.
Correct.
And 8% came from the city of Hartford. So the towns are not going to be ignored in any county executive race. That's what this would seem to say, right?
I don't want to make an, I mean, those are the numbers. I didn't make any political science estimation. Here's the distribution of the votes.
It's logical that a candidate would be foolish to ignore 30% of the voter base, right? That seems kind of logical to me, right?
We're just trying to present the facts. We're not trying to get political.
Okay, yeah. And when we look at the populations here, there's quite a few counties that were about our size when they made this switch. I'm seeing Winnebago was 130, Outagamie was 119, Fond du Lac was only 89, Kenosha was 123. I mean, that speaks to that we're at about the size where a lot of other counties traditionally have made this switch. Would I be misinterpreting that?
You are not misinterpreting that.
Okay. All right, nothing else here.
Okay. Supervisor Mahalik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of points. First, when Supervisor Jenkins was mentioning that there was going to be this onslaught of West Bend and Hartford running the county, I found that interesting because he ignored the village of Germantown, which of course is bigger than the city of Hartford. So I think he owes an apology to those individuals by having, and I would think that the supervisors who represent Germantown would understand that this is definitely to their advantage to move forward on this, and would hope that they would all do that because it really does make sense. I did want to make one comment, just getting off a little bit, on an email that I had received, and I'm assuming a number of you had received, from the Washington County Republican Party, because it contained what I believe is misinformation. And rather than just encouraging participation in this process we're all participating in right now, the email, which should have been sent out prior to the informational meeting the county board held back in May, the email's author claimed that the county board is rushing through the process, which in truth has been in discussion for months. Again, going back to what Supervisor Carr had mentioned, it was interesting in that he said, you know, he would like to hear more, and I appreciate the fact that he's interested in doing it, but the interesting thing is for those months, my phone worked. I was able to make calls to those individuals who I have met through different meetings that I've gone to in some of the other counties, like Winnebago County, Fond du Lac County, to find out exactly what they had. I don't think that any of us really needs to be spoon-fed, that if we have some questions on some of these things, we can reach out on our own, and I hope some of you did. The pejorative nature of the email that was sent out by the Washington County Republican Party seems to put forward a personal agenda. And if the WCRP board did not vote on approving the content of this email or sending it out, I believe it represents a misuse of the county GOP mail list, and whoever is responsible for authoring it and sending it out should consider resigning. I was very disappointed in seeing something like that because the Republican Party of Washington County has always said that the county is nonpartisan and all that. And in my years, I have never been contacted on the city or the county side by the Washington County Republican Party on any of the issues that I've had before. So they've obviously felt it wasn't really necessary. I talked to Supervisor McCune, and in the 17 years he's been here, many of those as the co-chair, or not the co-chair, excuse me, but the associate chair of the county, has never, his words, never, ever, ever once been contacted, and he's been a member before of the Washington County Republican Party. So very, very disappointed in suddenly how they jumped in, and the author's name was on it. The author's name was not on the email that I saw. It was just from the Republican Party. And it would have been nice if for all these years they decided to not get involved, to suddenly do what I consider almost more of a hatchet job in how they represented it. Was just very, very unfortunate that they jumped in the way they did, and they should really take a look at that. That was very, very unfortunate. Thank you.
Supervisor Jenkins.
I was trying to catch Chris in the middle of his discussion, but to be honest, I think it's very, I don't know if unprofessional is the word, but there's a line that we have with our employees, and I don't think it's right to be pulling opinions or sides on this issue out of them, which it seems like you were maybe trying to do with the data. I think that thank you, Ethan, for being as professional as you could and for supplying this information and not leaning one way or another. So I appreciate that.
Supervisor Sorcy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I should have said this before, but when you were talking about it, everybody kept doing their thing, so I just laid back. But one point that I did not like, we had the attorney come in at the State Fair and talked, and as far as I'm concerned, he could have stayed home. Because number one, we should have had at least 5 or 6 different supervisors from Milwaukee who are in the trenches every day and deal with things. And our question is like, well, if I do this, do I have the right to do this? There are so many questions that could have been asked from all these different supervisors. And then people who are saying, well, that is the point. They deal with it every single day of their life. So those are the guys that I wanted to talk to and I wanted to listen to because they're in the trenches. I've talked to some already, but that was a very important situation that we missed. Thank you.
Supervisor McCune.
Thanks. A couple things. So I'll make it clear then. On that, if everybody pull out the sheet with the Washington County distribution of votes cast, I thought I did it before, but I'll do it real clearly right now. Based on this, in the spring of 2019, there were 12,781 votes that accounted for 34% of the entire vote for our county in the spring of 2019. For the village, it was 14,000. Okay, so that was only 2,000 more. For the entire city of Hartford and West Bend combined, it came in at 10,712. So everybody in here is smart. We were all elected by the smart people within our districts. So smart people look at this and say there were 10,712 representing 2 cities. And if you add the other 2 towns as a group and the villages as a group, it was 26,000. So the villages and the towns, more than double, overwhelm these all-powerful city of Hartford and city of West Bend. So I'll make it real clear. So if anybody doesn't understand that, raise your hand. If we get to the fall of 2018 in the governor's race, there were 22,361 representing the towns. For the village, it was 27,310. For the all-powerful city of Hartford and West Bend, it was 20,874. Well, I'm in Erin, okay? That's where I represent, and I represent the town of Hartford. So if you look at those 2 groups, I'm pretty proud of how Erin's turnout compared to some, if you look at the city of Hartford, we're literally just little old Erin, which is a great township to live in, and I have since 1995. We represent 1/3 of Hartford. So, I don't know, maybe it's the Goliath thing and back to biblical things, but I feel pretty good about the towns overcoming this onerous fear of the 2 cities of our county. So hopefully that leaves that, I hope that discussion is done, because it's false. And again, as I mentioned to Mr. Jenkins, Gannon didn't cover the whole area. If you look at the village of Germantown and the powerful Richfield, look at Richfield. Richfield had 7,343. How many did Hartford have? 6,587. Less than Richfield. Yeah, exactly, in fall of 2018. Yes. So that's what I see. As far as the vote, I'm going to support this. The thought that we're ramming this through, I wish they were here, but they've passed away. Mr. Rademacher would be here. He used to sit right to my left. We had Don Bertram that used to sit over there, rest their souls. They've both passed on. We've had this discussion as a county. You may not have all been here, but this county has had this discussion for a long, long time. The person that actually, who is alive, who actually I heard from before I ran for this elected position, my first year, Pat Strakota and John Torinas had a group in West Bend that got together informally to discuss the different forms of government. At that time, we weren't even at the form of government we're at today. We switched that. Was it the right time then? I believed it was. Was it the right time to do executive? I thought so. That vote failed. We talked about executive before. That was in the early 2000s, 2002, where it had been brought up. So for anybody that says, oh, it's being rammed on your throat, this hasn't changed. You have. You've been elected. If you look at the research, though, this county has discussed this before. The executive group has discussed it before. It didn't get this far, but today, as I said, everybody on executive supported it other than Chris. So everybody you elected, including your chairman, your vice chairman, and everybody else in executive, supports this. Thank you.
Supervisor Schleif.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think everybody knows I've been fighting with this a long time. And up until a couple days ago, I was definitely on the no side. But going through all the things, all the arguments we've had, I wish I had a speechwriter like Mr. Mary. But I've come around to say that I know there's a lot of shortcomings. I know there's pitfalls, but we gotta look forward. And I think in the long term, this is best for Washington County. So I'm going to vote yes.
Supervisor Brandt.
Thank you. Just to correct my neighbor here to the right, he's thinking that the villages are massed in with the towns, and I would have to argue that the villages are more like cities than towns. It's just a different form of government. If you look at like the village of Menominee Falls and some of the larger ones around, they're definitely like cities. It's just that we elect a president instead of a mayor. So the point being that yes, the population is concentrated in the cities and the villages. And I really do think that, the towns might be on the short side, but that's a debate that you can have. I still think that this should have been, you had contacted me early on being on a committee to discuss the size of the board. I really think this should have been all part of that. I still have questions and things about the cost. I think a cost analysis should have been done. I brought that up before. And that's all I have to say. At this time, I'm just not comfortable voting for it.
Marilyn?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, since I worked with these election numbers for many years, and one of the things, I don't know, you probably went and got these numbers, I don't know from where, but for an election of the Supreme Court and the election of governor. When you look at elections and numbers that turn out, it depends upon a lot of different things. How many people are running in competition in a particular municipality, and who the people are. There are a lot of variables. So we're looking here, and no fault of anybody's, but we're only looking here at a Supreme Court race and a governor's race. You're not looking at all the races that could occur in another municipality that had competition. I just wanted to clarify that so people understood what these numbers are.
Thank you. Since I don't want to cast any aspersions upon our daily news and our ever-capable reporter McLean, but we don't have the resources to get the news out. We've done our best with social media, with the newspaper, with that. So while many of you have spoken and said that you have gotten calls by people that were not in favor of this, I took a proactive route. I went and I talked to people. I talked to over 250 people. And you know what most of them said the first time I said to it? I don't think that's right. I explained to them what that meant to them. Every person that I spoke to was in favor of it. Every single person, once I explained what the situation was, that it was their responsibility, that it was theirs. Now, how many people actually went out in the public and solicited to get information? Okay? All right? How many people just waited for the calls to come? Because if I waited for the calls to come, I wouldn't have gotten any. I got not one single call. Okay? I got one supervisor call me once, but that's about it. So it's important to know that first impressions aren't always accurate. So here I am talking to these people, and they said, no way, no how. And they look at it, and I was kind of the same way when Mike came to me when I first got on the board, that they wanted to do a look at a county executive, and I said, no way, no how. And when I see that we're really usurping the authority of the citizens by appointing a leader for them. I mean, we're a representative republic, and I said it in my little speech. We're a representative republic. We have to trust the people. Yeah, sometimes you might get a Tony Evers, but you know what? The people have spoken. You know what? He is our governor. He is our governor. So we have to deal with it, and we have our legislative branch to keep him in tow, to keep him under control, which is the same thing that you are here too. So I'm supportive of this. I did a lot of research on this. I talked to a lot of people in government. I talked to a lot of people, and Mr. Kreklow worked under all the different forms of government at a high level. And when he was asked to come, I wanted it to be completely objective. I was at an event in Germantown, and he was there. I wouldn't even go introduce myself to him. I did not want to affect him one way or the other. I wanted this to be a decision by the board. I wanted you to take the information, glean through it, and then come to a decision. So I'm in support of this. I think this is what the county needs. And I think if we choose not to do this, we will regret it. Thank you. Seeing no further comments? We'll vote on this electronically. Roger? It's, yeah. Motion fails on a tie vote. So, next order of business, the 2019 Resolution 19, continuance of jail camera replacement project using jail assessment funds. Oh, I'm sorry, motion. Supervisor Smisek, Supervisor Kelly. Finally got it right on the first try. Okay, any questions on this? Seeing none, we'll vote on this electronically. Are we ready? You good? Yeah, are we ready? Okay, vote on electronically, sorry. Supervisor Merton? Motion passes unanimously. Resolution 20, county-aided bridge replacement, Town of Kewaskum. Supervisor Bishop, Supervisor Connery. Is there any discussion? Everybody's too tired to talk anymore. Okay.
One.
Any, you're good? Any other discussion? Are we ready? Vote on this electronically? Motion passes unanimously. 2019 Resolution 22, advisory resolution in support of Medicaid reimbursement for senior, I'm sorry, I skipped one. 21, approving participation in the Solar Now pilot program. Your motion, Supervisor Mahalik, Supervisor Sorcy. Any discussion? Supervisor Krebs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reading through it, it appears that there's no cost to the county for the construction of the solar field. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And then can you outline the terms of how the payments to the county are calculated? What the kilowatt hour rate is, or if it's a flat rate, or what? How that's figured?
Flat rate in the contract. So the process, tonight you'll support both the term sheet and the final contract negotiation. It'll be a flat rate between 4,000 and 4,500 per kilowatt hour.
Okay, so
40 and 45,000, sorry.
So it's weather dependent then, based off of the production of the field. You know, the sunnier it is a year, the more money we'll make.
It's
in a
the
year.
ability for the solar units to make the power,
The
not how
build.
much they make.
Okay, so it's just the capacity. So it's going to be an even amount every year that we will get payments for. It doesn't matter on the production of that field.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
See no further.
Mr. Chairman, before you vote, I just want to make sure that you saw in your packet, because at the previous committee meeting, we had talked about, at the administrative committee meeting, we had talked about possibly going just north of the jail. This proposal is on the corner of Creek and River Road, so the far northeast corner of our property. Both were talked about at administrative, but they have narrowed it down specifically to that. So I just want to make sure you knew that before you vote.
Okay. Supervisor Schleif?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. Who owns these? Will we own them?
No,
So-
we Energies will own the, well. It's not technically winter.
So,
Yeah, we introduced it.
so if we have a hailstorm or something, we're not on the hook
Right,
for insurance
correct,
or
sorry.
nothing like that?
We are not. Whisk.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, seeing no further comment, we'll vote on this electronically. Motion passes unanimously. 2019 Resolution 22, Advisory Resolution in support of Medicaid reimbursement for senior living facilities. I have a motion, Supervisor Dice, Supervisor Brandt. Are there any questions regarding this? Ethan, do you want to speak to this briefly?
The JFC gave us a bunch of money, so your resolution would allow us to continue to lobby on this and make sure the governor doesn't veto it, or if the vetoes it, we continue to advocate for it. So everybody's happy in the long-term care industry about what they got from the Republican JFC.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, we'll vote on this electronically. Supervisor Sorcy? Motion passes unanimously. 2019 Resolution 23, resolution declaring the intent of Washington County to exercise the powers under State Statute 14520 sub 4 and 670703 Wisconsin statutes to make special assessments for costs related to inspection and pumping of private on-site wastewater treatment systems, POTUS, required under Statute 14520. Supervisor Hartwig, we have a second. Supervisor Galitz. Supervisor Kelling.
So my question, fiscal effect. Under the committee report, I believe this is an $11 charge, and it would generate roughly $227,527 of revenue for Washington County. The cost of required implementation mailings is estimated at roughly $20,000. So I guess why are we charging $11 and coming up with $227,000 versus $20,000?
The maintenance program is a fee on the tax bill. So it'll be $11 on every property that has a maintenance system that needs to be inspected, right? So the calculation of that will produce the $227,000 in operating revenue every year for the department. The $20,000 specifically is money that we have to spend ahead of time to notify all of those folks. So there's a statutory requirement that this is the first step in that process, which you're looking at today. And then once, if you decide to pass this resolution, then we need to do a mailing, $20,000 worth of a mailing to everyone who's got a system. And then if it's implemented after that, the fee will go into place and produce $227,000 in revenue.
And that is the actual amount that we estimate it's going to cost us to implement what the state has mandated we do?
To administer the program.
Okay. Just having cleared that up, then I'd just like to state that I can support it. As a citizen of West Bend, I do have municipal sewer and water, of which I do pay for both, and I do not go to my neighbors to ask for any help. The governor or the government, the state government has asked us to be the enforcers of their rule, of which, as a taxpayer, you know, I don't want to pay for somebody else to have a septic system. It's great if they have it, good, you know, God bless them, but I shouldn't have to help pay for the costs of making sure that they're in compliance. So having said that, I'm in support of this. Thank you very much.
Jamie, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to clarify, it's a detail, but at this point, there are roughly 20,273 parcels, and we're looking at a fee of estimated at $11 per parcel served by POUTS, or $11 per system on a tax parcel, whichever is greater. So there are roughly 104 parcels throughout the county that could see a fee higher than $11, and these would all be if you think, you need to think about special exception type of properties where they have 4 or 5 different holding tanks or systems serving a development, whereby it isn't fair for them to necessarily pay the same fee as Jamie Ludovic pays for the pout system in her backyard, as it relates to the costs of the program. So it's a detail, I just want to make sure it's clear that it's not necessarily $11 for everybody, it's $11 for 99% of the people.
Supervisor Merton.
I'm just trying to understand that. So there are cards that are sent out right now for people to pump their septic systems. I don't know how many, is it every 2 or 3 years? Okay.
3.
And so consequently, they're going to be charged on their tax bill for a permit? Or what do you call it?
Yes, they would be the cost for us to maintain that program. So our technology, our staff that sends out the mailings, our enforcement of that, the time that's put into that, and the cost estimated to be attributed to the septic maintenance programming in the county would be charged only to those who have septic rather than the taxpayers as a whole, which is about 40% of the population.
But the people have to pay for having their septic systems pumped,
Yes,
and those reports are filed with your department.
yes.
So some would be filed even without getting notified that it's time to pump.
That is true, that does happen.
Yeah, I'm just a little puzzled. I understand the program was going on and they were going to get back at the systems that were put in longer ago, and that you'd be keeping track of all of those. What about the people that do not abide by the pumping requirement?
Well, this would be a special assessment on their tax bill, so if they,
What would you do to make them pump their systems every so many years?
and that's part of the program costs that we're talking about, because we do enforcement. We're just getting ready to do that again, where we send out third notices, fourth notices to people, and then issue citations, go to court, and work towards compliance.
Okay, thank you. Or do you put it on on their tax bill as an assessment? Do you go pump it out and put it on their tax bill as a special assessment?
We don't do pumping. The county doesn't do pumping.
No. They'd have to contract with someone. I'm just puzzled.
That's more of a court question, I think, for Brad on terms of what happens with compliance.
Yeah, we do prosecute violators, but ultimately what we try to do is gain compliance, and then when we can, we just dismiss the tickets and hopefully never end up trying a case. And we have some of those going on as we speak. So that's, I guess, part of the enforcement mechanism. And I guess if it came down to it, and we're trying to get a system pumped and we had to send somebody out there, we'd want to assess those costs against that person for whatever it costs the county to do it. But that's not a regular practice.
Thank you.
Supervisor Bertram, sorry. Yeah, Supervisor Bertram.
No, thank you. Yeah, I've read this thing and it doesn't make any sense, to be honest with you. Up until recently, I've always been on a system. My understanding is if I put up a house and I want to put a system in, I have to get a permit to do that, so I'm paying to have the system, I'm paying to put the system in. It sounds in here like what Marilyn is trying to get at. It sounds like the county blows out and pumps it, and the county sticks their head in there and inspects it, and you don't. So $227,000 to do what? Give out the permits, which you charge for. If there is a violation, you charge by ticketing them, and they pay for that. And when they get their card, they pay to pump it, they pay to get it pumped. Then they send the card in and you file the card and then you put it in a computer or whatever and it goes to the state. I don't see where you need $227,000 to do that. I mean, again, I think what Marilyn was getting at is the county gonna, if the county's gonna go into the business of pumping septic systems and going out and checking each one and all that kind of stuff, that's one thing. But $227,000 to get a card in the mail and put it in the computer or send a card out when you're already getting money for somebody installing one, I don't know where, I don't get it. I'm like Marilyn, I have no idea where that money is gonna go. I mean, I'm sure we're gonna spend it somehow. I have no doubt on that, but you're not gonna spend it on septic tanks and holding tanks. I'm not gonna agree with this. This is ridiculous to charge people that have these systems, again, after they paid to have them put in, after they pay to pump them, and as long as they're legal, they're getting nothing out of this. The county's getting $227,000, and then they can figure out how to spend it. This is wrong. I am not gonna agree with this.
Hey, Jamie, can you explain the statute and when that statute went into effect and to enact those fees? Can you speak to that?
Well, when the state changed the program to require counties to maintain the inventory, at that point, they allowed for a special assessment for the program, which was, it was a mandate, but they were allowing a funding mechanism. So most of the other 25 counties already do this, and most of those made the decision at that point in order to pay for the development of the inventory, the system, the staffing, and the POUTs to go forward and implement the fee. So in recent years, I think Fond du Lac last updated their fee in 2007. The fee, I did kind of generally provide an outline of what we would be paying for in terms of how we calculated and what we're planning to justify on the fee. Just to walk you through the process, the preliminary resolution directs me and my team to prepare a report, which is going to be if this moves forward, a 7 or 8 page report that justifies, what is the rationale, what is the exact fee, why we're doing this, what people can expect on their houses and their parcels, who to contact, authorizes the mailing to all 21,000 houses with the public hearing notice and the comments, and then puts the public hearing back at the Land Use and Planning Committee. So the process is structured so that if residents and or county board supervisors have objections to how because we can only charge what we can, justify back to the actual program, have objections to the specific calculations in terms of how we got to the cost, that you would weigh in through that process, and then the Land Use and Planning Committee would ultimately be recommending what the final fee amounts would be. I've shared it with you today. We don't have to at this point in the process. We just felt like we needed to give you an idea so that you kind of knew what you were getting yourself into before 21,000 letters go out, telling people that they might have, well, how much is the automatic question, is how much is this gonna be? So $11 is a first guess at what the costs of the program could be. It's in the ballpark of what other counties are charging for this, anywhere up to $16 in terms of justifiable costs. So it's not set in stone at this point. There's it's going on the tax bill, so there's a pretty statute required process we have to follow to set that fee. We can't just increase this fee each year. It has to go back through the process. So the process is built so that if you or residents have those concerns, they do it on the front end, so that it's not well, you're just gonna figure out how to spend the money later type of a scenario, and that we're on the hook for, at least on paper, justifying how that program is being utilized.
That was a really long way of saying they required us to do this 20 years ago. They gave us an opportunity to charge a fee. The county board at the time decided to suck it up in the tax levy and let the tax levy pay for it. 20 years later, we're saying there's a different option. We have tax levy freezes. We need to look at a different option. That's it. There's nothing more to it than that.
Yeah, but the thing of it is, am I still on, or?
You're on.
Okay. the thing of it is I don't care how much studying you're doing. I really don't. There's nothing more that you're doing that you're gonna add. You're going to do what you've always done without the fees, okay? I understand that. You're gonna do what you've always done, but now you think that it could cost you $227,000 to keep doing what you've been doing?
That's my estimate of what we currently spend on this program.
Oh, boy, I gotta see that 7 pages.
And there was a summary in your packet of the calculation.
Supervisor Schleif.
I was just gonna reinforce that. We could have charged this for about 40 years now, and we haven't. So we're just catching up. And if you're one of the, I think there's 24 or 25,000 people on public water and sewer in the county, we've been subsidizing those people on private all these years. So I, for one, would not like to keep on doing that.
Supervisor Brandt.
Yeah, I kind of struggle with being on both ends of this. I live in the village of Slinger, but I happen to have a septic system because my property just can't be served by sewer. Yeah, the villages and the cities are under the thumb of the DNR. And they've got this big phosphate mandate now, and we're working with the city of Hartford and trying to control costs on both ends. I don't really have a problem with paying $11. It's not a big deal. The question I have, and I saw in the report that you have a levy change of $170,000. I might be wrong, but I know at the village and the city end of it, if you institute a fee and you generate $200,000, you have to reduce the levy by that much.
So
Am I wrong on that?
You're right that exists, but it's very specific for what types of fees. Okay, so this fee is not part of that. This fee was authorized by the legislature specifically to pardon me? Yes, the levy will stay as is. You would just gain additional revenue. So it's exempt from that clause.
Okay.
Supervisor Kelly.
Long and the short of it, from an uneducated man, admittedly. The state says we have to look after these septic systems. We have to make sure they're in compliance. We've been doing that for 20 plus years, right? Probably 20 years ago, guessing, most people had their own septic in this county, or at least the majority certainly did. So it probably made sense for the county to pick up the tab, so to speak, because most people would be paying it. Anyway, now, however, a lot more people are on municipal systems. It isn't right that I should pay for your compliance with your system. This is what the county is spending on this compliance checks. So we're removing this money from everybody in the county paying it, and basically it's a user fee. It's not really difficult to understand. There's people that have to make sure that these things are pumped out in a timely manner. This is what the state has determined. You know, we didn't even determine that in the first place, but we should be reimbursed for it. So that's what it's really about, is you owe the county for making sure that you are in compliance. This is what it costs. We're not looking to get any more money from anybody. She has to justify everything that she's trying to get. So it's not like it's overtaxing. And that's why I asked the original question about the $20,000 in the first place, was to make sure that this was not a fee that generates income. This is not generating any income. This is reimbursing the county for what we are spending on these septic systems. Not all taxpayers should have to pay this fee for certain people who have these systems. Simple as that. Thank you.
Supervisor Krebs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at the breakdown, it says the levy change of 170,000. What is that number actually talking about, is that the cost to the county that we spend annually, the 170,000?
No. So what I did, and for the purposes of this process, this is not the budget, so that the budget still has to occur. But for the purposes of the fee and justifying the cost, I guessed at the 2020 budget, and then I allocated some of those costs off to the fee, which equaled $227,000 worth of what I said could be the revenue. But because so it should be a $227,000 levy reduction, because that's how much I'm collecting for the fee. To follow that math, that could be ultimately what happens, maybe. However, my budget from 19 to 20 increased, because if you will look through it, I added, there's wage increases, there's health insurance increases, I added a vehicle reserve cost in there, and then I added some substantial costs for technology to further build the POUTS maintenance program modules.
Okay.
So it didn't go down the full amount.
Okay, so to make it simple math, I'll work with one number of 227,000. If this new user fee, because that's what it is passed, will the budget of the Parks Department go down by 227,000 since that's on the levy, since now we have new funding for just the special purpose?
No, it'll go to close the gap.
So the Parks Department budget will increase by $227,000 a year.
The revenue will increase. The expenses will not increase by that amount.
So the new revenue will go where?
The revenue will pay for this specifically. The rest of the levy then that used to pay for it will go to the rest of the budget to fund other things.
So the budget will not decrease by $227,000 a year?
Correct.
So we are increasing the amount of money we can get, but claiming we're cutting taxes.
No claim.
Okay.
This is how you manage the gap. Now, out of Gaming County, they pass a new sales tax.
Supervisor Bertram.
Yes, I apologize. I didn't get as far as this. I'm sorry. But now that I'm looking at it, according to what you have here, the guesstimate that you did for the budget, proposed budget is $315,924. Now, what you're saying here is the amount allotted to what we're talking about is $126,370. In other words, 1/3 of your budget is going to go to this one program to take care of septic tanks in the Washington County. Is that, am I looking at that right?
40%, yes.
40%. I'm just, again, I'm going to agree with the other couple supervisors. I don't have a problem with getting some of this money back, but I really, if the county is spending 1/3 of the budget in the Parks Department to look after septic tanks, again, that just boggles my mind. I just don't understand it. 1/3 of the budget, so that you can send out postcards and you can get cards back that they pumped their septic tanks. You don't go out and look at anything or anything like that.
Yeah.
So, and then to put it in the computer and maybe do a program, to me, that's a ton of money for that.
You have a valid point. I just want to clarify that this is 1/3 of what is the sanitation and zoning project budget. So the people in there, we do, most of what it is permitting for shoreline zoning, POUTS permitting, which is, maybe another 1/3.
But you get money for the permits,
Yep.
right?
Then
Okay.
POUTS maintenance
Okay.
is in there, and then there's also miscellaneous type wetland floodplain type work. So that's where, if you look at the staff breakdown, that can be helpful to kind of determine who's in there. It's not the entire Parks Department.
Okay.
Supervisor Stefan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I have, Jamie, is looking at this chart, there's 25 counties that do this.
13 of them have a special charge and 12 have billed with maintenance. Can you explain the difference of why they're going two different ways?
So the ones that bill with maintenance likely implemented that before the special assessment was an option. And they basically, when they send out the postcards, they send out letters billing the homeowner. So you'd get a postcard that says you need to maintain and you need to pay the Planning and Parks office, $20 because your cycles turn. That's an option. It's not something I'm recommending due to the office staff burden and the collections burden on that type of a process when it's much easier to manage it through the special assessment process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hearing no further comments, to vote on this electronically. It's a majority vote. At this stage. Motion passes 26. The 2019 resolution 2019 resolution 24, transfer from the general fund, Parks, Planning and Parks Department, additional staffing. Supervisor Boa, Supervisor Mary.
We're ready unless you have questions.
Yeah. Any questions regarding this? Okay, we'll vote on this electronically. Supervisor Merton? Motion passes 23-3. 2019 Ordinance 6, Washington County Staffing Plan, Planning and Parks Department, Land and Water Conservation Division, and Land Use Division, and Washington County Classification and Compensation Plan 7.02 and 7.03. Entertain a motion. Supervisor Gallots, Supervisor Carr. Supervisor Gallots.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a question for Ms. Ludwig. So regarding that merger of the departments and the additional role, what type of, key performance indicators or success criteria have been set up to be able to measure that effectiveness of those department mergers as well as that additional role? Because I do know that there are some holes that we're filling with the additional role. Because I just want to make certain that we understand what we're getting when we approve this, if we approve this.
Metrics related to quality within the outputs of conservation and land use, or financial metrics related to the future of how dollars are allocated?
My first thought was the first. So if we're saying we're merging the two departments together, how are we defining that success?
So I guess in the short term, the success would be that I think this is going to be an ongoing topic. We have some initial initiatives and projects that we need to get implemented in the next 12 to 18 months. You're going to start to see those coming with ordinance changes, technology initiatives, in theory, improved and streamlined processes within land use. So speed, really that's where you're going to see the initial metrics is pretty much the initial focus will be exclusively land use. In terms of how it combines with land conservation, I think that is something that it will really depend on the individual, Paul Sebo, who's here, who will manage the division's, direction in terms of where land conservation is going and how those roles end up playing together. And then also, how the structure shakes out. There's a few variables that could come into play if we end up regionalizing with another county for our land use function or another function of that sort, or if we end up cross-collaborating more amongst the two divisions. So that's a big question that we'll need to answer within the first 12 to 18 months of this position, if you follow that.
Thank you.
Supervisor Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I have a problem with adding another high-end person as opposed to a worker. If you're trying to implement programs and get things up and running, I don't see how having more management as opposed to someone who knows the programs and is actually doing the programs I think would serve you better for bringing those programs up to date, because I understand that some of the land use needs to be upgraded.
Right, so a pay grade 13 range is $69,000 to $89,000 a year annually. The intention of this position is that it's able to do both. If you talk to Paul Sebo or Phil Gaudet, who are currently my division managers, they are working division managers that bring both boots on the ground knowledge, but also the ability to implement projects, technology changes, or in the case of what we're going to be looking for this position to do, take a look at processes and basically future plan the organization. I've been saying it's an opportunity for us to be thoughtful about what the future of this looks like compared to reactionary. So that's the reason for going with the manager versus the boots on the ground.
Okay, I just feel we're getting a bit top-heavy here, and it's a lot of money to spend on a 2-year position where it's temporary. How you're going to find the quality of person that you want when they know they're only going to be there for 2 years, I think you're selling yourself short on that one.
This is not intended to be the temporary position. This position is temporarily funded, so the idea being that in the 2-year span, probably sooner, you're going to hear what the plan is to stay within our existing budget and what positions will exist. Did you follow that?
Supervisor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was a little curious looking at this. Usually when you combine departments of this sort, which may lead to further accommodations, as you said, with potentially other counties, you're looking for efficiencies and, or you're trying to satisfy additional mandates. So, do we have additional mandates, or are you trying to achieve efficiencies that will be, in fact, allowing us to save money in the long term, even though we spend a little up front? I'm a little confused about exactly what's happening here.
That's it. So a short-term investment in projects that in theory will result in long-term efficiencies and ideally less managers over the long term.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, we'll vote on this electronically. This is a 2/3 vote. This is fund transfer. Motion passes 22-4. 2019 Ordinance 7, Washington County Staffing Plan, Samaritan Health Center, and Washington County Classification Compensation Plan, 7.02 and 7.03. Any motion? Supervisor Dice. Supervisor Sorcy. Any discussion? Supervisor Merton.
I was looking at this before and trying to understand what it's about, and I guess I have the wrong one now. It's 7, Ordinance 7. Is the reason for the increase in pay grade, gotta pull this up, because the previous employee was at pay grade 9, but higher on the pay scale by experience. And this change is for moving it up to pay grade 12, so the dollars don't change.
Can you try to answer this question? Or for Samaritans? I didn't hear it. I didn't either. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
What's the reason for the pay grade change? It looks to me like if it's at pay grade 9, which the previous employee perhaps had, and was at a higher number of years of experience, now the new person would be coming in at the beginning and be moved up pay grades to get the same pay?
Hey, Matt, Todd will speak to that.
All right.
So the position that existed prior, the requirement for the job was a lower requirement, which one of the things included was a bachelor's, or a high school diploma was the minimum requirement.
With a what?
It was a high school diploma. Currently, this new job is going to require a bachelor's degree. So when you go through the whole grading structure, one of the things that carries a lot of weight is education. So just by doing that alone, it does move it a couple of pay grades immediately. So it really comes down to a higher level of education and experience that's required for this role versus what it was before.
Experience doesn't matter anymore?
Education and experience. So
Well,
education carries a lot of weight. Experience adds to that, but experience doesn't necessarily eliminate that education requirement when you look at a grading system like the Carlson system, the Hayes system, or otherwise. It's just part of the system that you put in front of me to grade jobs with.
just my opinion. Sometimes experience is worth a lot more than education.
Understand.
Thank you. Seeing no further comments, we'll vote on this electronically. Motion passes 25 to 1. Josh, are you going to do the budget goals presentation?
Sure.
Yep, there we go.
But he's gonna read it to you.
Word for word. 2020 budget, normally this is part of my State of the County address, because we did that differently this year. I have goals in front of you. So it's similar to what we've done in years past, but I wanted to make sure that this is the same direction that this board wants to continue to go down. First, hold or reduce current tax rate. It appears, based on what we're seeing with permits from last year, that net new construction will continue to grow. Therefore, we would expect a reduction in the tax rate. We again, as part of the 4 goals for 4 years, plan to reduce our budget deficit. 2020 will be the last year of the planned budget deficit, meaning 2021, that'll be at 0. So you will not have a budget deficit in 2021. That, if you recall, when I started here, you had a planned budget deficit of $1.8 million every year. Implementation of the new compensation plan. That project is underway. It's currently on track for implementation in January of 2020. We expect that will cost us a significant amount of new money. We will build that into the existing budget, and we will do so without raising taxes. 2018-19 budgets include funding for that implementation. And then finally, we'll continue with the sustainability plans that we have. The park sustainability plan will seek its 3rd year of implementation as you have approved in previous years. You tonight have approved the Historical Society transfer to happen. EDWC has already transferred. And in the coming months before your term is completed, we will attempt to do the same, have the same conversation with the Fair Park, AIS, and the Convention Visitors Bureau. And then finally, implementation of the 2050 Transportation Network Sustainability Plan. Those are the highlights. If you have any changes that you'd like to see, if you want to see the levy reduced, if you want to raise taxes, tell me now. I'll forever hold your peace.
Supervisor McCune.
Then let's reduce the levy, reduce the taxes, and address the biggest elephant that's not being addressed here, and that's Samaritan. Because you're talking about sustainability. I don't see anything, I haven't heard anything about our biggest formidable, and I mean a big snowball that's in front of us right now with Samaritan.
Yes.
So where does that fall?
Thank you for the question.
But I do want the taxes reduced and everything you just
The
said.
levy reduced, I hear you. So the Samaritan, we are in the process of hiring a CPA firm. We have interviewed two. We'll go through a traditional RFP process with those two who are niche in that market space. And we will ask them through the Health and Human Services Committee to help give us options on the future of Samaritan. As many of you know, that facility is over 50 years old at this point in time. Medicare funding, Medicaid funding, Title 19 specifically, comprises approximately 80 to 85% of our residents. That funding, long-term, is very questionable, and the nursing shortage in the industry is very difficult, along with the capital expenditures of a 50-year-old building, which our preliminary estimates show as between $5 and $10 million. And that's not remodeling, that's simply addressing HVAC concerns and boilers and things of that variety. So there's a significant investment that you would need to make, or a substantial change to the way you've done business for the last 52 years at the Samaritan campus. So we will be engaging that CPA firm this year. We will work through Second Vice Chair Dice's committee on Human Services Committee to bring a recommendation ultimately forward to this board. It will be funded with our strategic priorities dollars, what's left of them, and that'll be in front of you before the end of this year is our plan. Because chances are we're going to need to go to referendum because we're talking about additional dollars more than likely in one way, shape, or form.
Okay, any other questions?
Everybody's comfortable with this approach to our budget? Or anybody not comfortable with this approach to our budget?
Supervisor Bullock.
What does our gap look like that you have to cover?
$1.2 million this year. We just went through that in a fiscal endurance tabletop exercise. If you have now approved the fee that was just talked about a little bit ago, that'll help reduce that number closer to $1 million. But remember, on top of that, we'll be adding the expenses of implementing the new compensation plan. But that will be worked into the budget, and there won't be any additional ask for spend beyond what we can do with net new construction. There were some other questions, I think. Maybe
Anybody
not.
else want to buzz in with a question?
Or hands up. Oh.
Okay, Supervisor Carr, you had wanted to make a request on your vote for the History Center?
Yeah, my enthusiasm for the august group here. I voted in favor of giving $3 million to the Historical Society, and I was reminded that since I've been on the board for a number of years, it may have been a conflict of interest for me to so vote. So I'm asking the board to allow me to change that vote to an abstention.
If there's no objections to that, we'll do that. Any objections? So move to abstention. Thank you. Before we go to tomorrow, the 911 Memorial in Kewaskum, 12 o'clock p.m. If you need to pick up, it is at the Kewaskum Municipal Annex. It'll be in the 911 Memorial. It's going to be the groundbreaking. So, what? What's it? The vets?
We
Yeah,
can't get it to.
You can't get it to run, so we're skipping that.
Can you just share how much we made?
Sure.
Okay, we're gonna do one more thing, verbal reports, since our AV is not working. Josh will report on.
So just to give you an update on the Forever Honoring Our Washington County Veterans, I plan to show a video, but the audio isn't working at the moment. But I'm happy to report that we had, as you may recall, we had a goal of raising $150,000. We had about 150 people join us on the Eisenbahn Trail, which was very exciting. If you were there, thank you for coming. We had overwhelming amount of help with volunteers and donations. So to the many people who donated, thank you. To the committee members, Kurt Rush, our Veteran Service Officer, who helped. He was key in making all of this work together. And of course, to Ashley and Justin, who walked with us, and my wife Jody, who's not here tonight. We raised $170,000 and counting. And you can still write checks, so we have a couple other businesses we're working with. Our goal ultimately with the fund for the Veteran Service Office is to get to 200,000. By the time we write the check to the 9/11 Memorial, which you're just invited to the groundbreaking tomorrow, we'll still have about 110 net in cash. So we've got a little work to do yet to get to a sustainable point, but we've got that seed money and we're well on our way. So thank you for all your support.
Thank you for doing all you did. Next meeting date will be Wednesday, July 10th, 2019, 6:00 PM. We are tentatively scheduled to have Dr. Schrader come in and report in closed session on the results of our executive coaching session, so we can understand a little bit more of why we do what we do. And so, I entertain a motion to adjourn. Supervisor Kelling, Supervisor Schleif. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Adjourn.
Let's go straight to July 10th.
Thank you.